want to paint. Wait, how do I do that? Do I need a studio? In my house? Somewhere else? And what do I need? Brushes? Lettuces? Paints? Knives? Oh my God, what do I need? Don't panic, because in today's video, we are going to answer all of these questions.
Hi, welcome to Rebecca's channel.
Today, we are going to talk about the studio setup and materials for oil painting. The details will depend, of course, on your space and your budget. But there are some basic rules that you can follow, even if the only space you have to paint right now is a tiny room or your garage. Before we start, a disclaimer. I am not an expert on chemicals or in toxic substances. What I'm giving you here are the advices and tips that I have learned along my career.
Oil painting involves the use of potentially toxic and hazardous materials. So please, read and follow all safety precautions before you use them.
And now, let's start with how to set up a studio.
First, you need a good easel. It needs to be robust and not wobbly. You need to be able to change the height as well as the angle of your canvas. Another option, if you don't have an easel per se, is to convert a wall into an easel. You can do this by simply attaching screws or nails to your studs and use it to hang the canvases there. Or you can make it with a wooden rail like in these examples.
I personally love the idea of utilizing a large wall as my easel. I cannot do it right now because I don't have wall space in my current studio. But if and when I can do it,
I will go for this method of screwing wood slats to my studs and then have different holes with wooden pegs to hang my canvases. Simple and practical. Number 2, you need a table to your right if you are right-handed or to your left if you are a lefty. Here you will hold your palette, brushes, colors, and medium. Ensure that the palette is the closest to you as you will be using it frequently. Number 3, your model or your picture reference should be to your left if you are right-handed or to your right if you are a lefty.
Next, a seat. Do you need a seat? It depends. Some people like to paint while sitting, other people love to paint standing up. This is totally up to you.
Number 5, if your room is not large enough, I highly recommend getting some binoculars and using them inverted. In this way, you are able to see your painting from far, far away. As you know, it's highly recommended always to step away from your painting as you work on it. But it's also very important to be able to see it from even farther away. Number 6, lighting. Your lights should be 5000 K. And ideally, they have to stay at a 35-degree angle from your canvas and placed as high as your ceiling allows. You may be able to use natural light if your room is facing north, but in most cases, the light will change too much along the day, which makes using artificial lighting a preference. Actually, I advise to cover your windows with some blinds to avoid sun reflections. If needed, place as well a small light close to your palette to help you mix colors properly. 7, your floor. Most probably, you will make a mess. If you don't care, that's fine. Otherwise, a great solution to preserve your floors and damage is to use sport floor mats that interlock like this here. 8, you will need to organize your materials. I use some cheap metal shelves for my materials, and I built myself this wooden structure to hold my panels and canvases. Try to keep paper with paper, chemicals with chemicals, paint with paints, etc.
Keep in mind that mediums, oils, and varnishes should not be exposed to excessive heat or direct sunlight. Number 9, ventilation.
Ideally, pick a room in which you can have 2 windows or doors opposite each other. Otherwise, build an extractor in the room. Weather allowing, keep your windows open while you are working. If this is not possible, just keep in mind that now and then you need to ventilate the room. Some people always use masks while working. I don't find it necessary all the time, but this depends on your sensibility. More tips on safety. Don't drink, eat, or smoke while painting. If drinking tea or coffee or water, just make sure to keep it far away from your mediums. Close your paint tubes and medium jars when you are not using them. If you spill something, clean it immediately. I also recommend having gloves so that when you are handling some toxic colors like cobalt or lead white, you don't have to touch them directly. Remember as well to not touch your eyes and mouth before you wash your hands. Have also your smoke detectors in order.
Basically, what I'm asking you to do is follow common sense precautions.
And number 10, please keep a separate trash for your paper towels that will be filled with oils and mediums or varnishes. You should not mix it with your normal trash. Keep this aside and bring it to the proper garbage disposal for toxic paints in your town.
Now, let's jump into materials.
Number 1, you need a Mahl. This is to keep your hand steady when painting something small or in detail. 2, a value finder. 3, a color finder. What is that? It's just a small window that allows you to isolate colors, so you can create one yourself very easily. 4, obviously you will need charcoal, pencils, or whatever it is that you use to sketch or transfer drawings into your canvas or panel.
5, you are going to need lots of cotton rags. Use them, not just to clean, for which I think paper towels are better, but use them to paint or to soften a glaze. Something doesn't work? Don't be afraid, use the rags. Take it out and start over. 6, a palette. I highly recommend acrylic palette in gray color. You can also use a simple piece of glass and paint it gray at the bottom. Some people prefer to use paper palettes or even wooden ones. Get one as large as you can manage in your space. Above all, try to get it in gray so that when you mix your colors, it's going to be against something neutral. Because when you mix it against a white surface, you're not gonna get the correct colors. I also use a wet palette sealed box where I store my palette at night to preserve the oils that remain from my painting session. Although, the best way to slow down your oils from drying is to freeze them. When I have too much color left over and I'm not going to paint maybe for a couple of days, I place them in a small piece of wood that I have, I seal them in a container, and I keep them in the freezer. 7, brushes. There are 2 main types of brushes used in oil. Those with stiff tufts and those with soft tufts. The stiff ones are known as bristle brushes, and they will take a greater degree of punishment. The softer ones, more delicate, are often referred to as sable or synthetic sables. They require more delicate treatment. The bristle will mix the oil more with the prior coats, while the sables not as much, which is why these are used mostly for final details or also when painting a la prima. You absolutely need to have a lot of bristles, natural or not. If you get the natural ones, the best ones are made from chunking hog. At first, get some flats and some rounds and check how you prefer painting. I myself don't use rounds much, but this is a question of personal preference. If you have the money, get some Kolinsky sable for details. If not, synthetic ones are a great option as well. I also recommend that you get an angle brush because these come very handy to paint hair and other loose effects. You don't need to start with a lot of brushes, just enough so that you can test and slowly learn which ones you prefer to use. By the way, Don't throw away old paint brushes.
They may come handy when you are doing a Scrabble technique, or you can also cut them in funky ways to get funky strokes.
Normally in oil painting, you always start with bristle brushes and then utilize the sable or synthetic sable more versus the end and in the final details. However, there are many paintings I have created in which I solely use bristle brushes.
Unfortunately, there is a huge difference in brush quality, which is tightly correlated with the price, and it's going to make a difference in your painting. Think of this like when you just learn to drive. You do not want to get a Porsche because you could ruin it, and why spend a fortune when you are still learning? But if you get an old crappy car, it's also going to make your life very difficult, precisely because you are not an experienced driver yet.
And the same goes with brushes. At the beginning, you need something solid and dependable. You don't need to get the best quality, but please do not get the cheapest ones because they are really terrible. I'm attaching a file showing different brush brands and their pricing. I'm not affiliated with any of these brands, but this is what I have come to discover along the way, so I hope it can be helpful to you.
8. Palette knives. At the very least, you need a simple one like this one to mix your oil colors. But you can get many more and experiment with them. Do not limit yourself to the ones available in an art store. Go to any other hardware store and get different palette knives, which are gonna be cheaper by the way, but can work very well and can give you interesting effects. 9. Besides brushes and palette knives, try different tools. Squeegees, silicone brush, a trowel. Experience with tools that can create interesting texture effects. 10. Your oils. With oils happens like with brushes. Quality comes related to price, and it's going to show in your painting.
I have also created a list for you to download with different oil brands and different pricing, so that you can pick depending on how advanced or beginner you are. What colors should you have at the beginning? You can go as simple as utilizing the Zorn palette. The Zorn palette uses only 4 colors, which are ivory black, flake or titanium white, yellow ochre, and red vermilion. Or you can go as complex as your imagination goes. In the files that you have to download, I am also making a list of the suggested colors to have at the beginning. It is much better that you don't start with a huge palette. Simplify it. Let's talk a little bit about flake white, also known as lead white, because it does have lead. I know that sounds dangerous, but this white is commonly used a lot for skin colors because it gives you a very nice effect. Lead also creates a more cohesive attachment between pigment, medium, and surface. So whenever you use it and you add it to some other color, you are increasing the conservation rate of your painting.
As far as you don't eat it or you sniff it, you are gonna be fine. And do the same thing that I recommended for some cobalts or cadmiums. Wear gloves when you are handling them, especially if you have a sensitive skin or an open wound. A couple of tips that are also very helpful related to oil paint tubes. You will need some pliers because sometimes the top is gonna refuse to open, and get a paint squeezer so you can use every last drop of your paint. 11. Mediums. After trying several mediums out there, I myself prefer to simply use a little bit of linseed oil. Most of the time I use nada. On my first coat, I usually start with a mix of oil and thinner, but on the next painting session, I will use no medium or just a little bit of linseed oil. Many people love using a medium called liquid. You can try it. If you like it, just be careful because it creates a different shine than oil by itself. So I recommend that if you use liquid, you have to use it all over. Whatever medium you use, you are going to need very, very little. I actually use a dropper for my linseed oil. You also need to keep the containers closed when you are not using it.
And now let's talk about thinners. I love turpentine. I actually think I started painting in oil because of the smell of turpentine, but it gives me horrible headaches. So I advise you to use mineral spirits, which are less toxic and less smelly. Also, let me give you a note. Some people confuse turpentine, which is used as a thinner, with terpenoid, which is actually a cleaner. And in medias, just remember to follow the rule of fat over lean. This is why at the beginning you use mineral spirits, later you can use pure oils, and then later still you can use them mixed with linseed or liquid. 12. Cleaners. Please don't use mineral spirit to clean your brushes. I highly recommend that you use citrus oil. This is so much better. This one is a great brand, but it's more costly. However, I used some other ones, not as good, but that they did the job very well before I was able to afford the expensive one. Again, unless you are using it, keep the container where you keep your cleaner closed. I also recommend using from 2 to 4 jars, which have a mesh under, like these ones. By the way, I got mine at Michael's. Very inexpensive. Why to use more than one? Because then you're gonna clean your brush several times, every time getting it cleaner and cleaner. While you are painting, most of the time you are only going to need to clean your brush with a rag or a paper towel. When your cleaner gets very dirty, like here, you don't have to throw away everything. What I normally do is filter it through some paper towels. I clean again my containers. And in the container one, the first one I used to clean, it's where I put the recycled citrus oil. And on the other containers, I fill them with clean oil. As you see here, after a while, it has settled down, and while it's not perfectly clean, it is much cleaner than before, so it's okay to keep reusing it. Besides the citrus cleaner, once in a while, you can also wash your brushes with soap. I use a soap conditioner. You can also use just some dishwasher soap, and then, to preserve them, use any hair conditioner. What's very important is that you dry your brushes vertically after you have used water, or at least incline, because oil and water don't mix. Myself, I only wash my brushes with water normally once a week, on Fridays when I know I'm not going to paint during the weekend. This, for example, it's a little rag that I did with 4 pieces of wood that were lying around so that I can keep my brushes inclined when drying. You can also use a simple jar with some elastic, and you place your brushes like this. Number 13, varnishes. Final varnishes in oil painting should be applied only about 6 months or even 1 year after the painting is finished. Why? Because the oil is still drying. Even if it may be dry to the touch, it's not really dry. Now, many times, what's going to happen is that your painting has to go to a client or to a gallery before this time period. I just have 2 recommendations here. You can either use a retouching varnish or gumbar varnish done by gambling. It comes in satin or in gloss, and it can be applied when the paint is dry to the touch. 14. Canvases, paper, wood panels. As a rule of thumb, remember that a rigid support is going to last longer than a soft support. But if you like canvases, just ensure they are a very good quality. If you use paper, please glue the paper to a rigid surface before you sell it. As with brushes and with oils, find a balance between your budget and the quality. Avoid poorly made canvases or panels because they will warp and they will ruin your painting. A good well-priced option is Blick Premier cotton canvases and Blick Premier wood panels. Use Blick Studio canvases or panels only at the beginning. If you decide to buy and prime boards, I highly recommend using a PVA size to prime it, followed by a ground of your choice. Another tip, if you don't have money for framing, buy gallery deep canvases or panels. This should be at least 1.5 inch deep. Galleries allow you to display and frame canvases or panels if they are
1.5 inch deep or more. Another little tip, before you start painting, tape the edges. Because if you tape them, once you are finished, you can decide to leave your edge clean as it came, or you can decide to paint it in some other color.
And this is all for today, guys. Remember, I have attached files with tips about which brushes and oils to purchase. I have also placed links to many of the materials that we spoke about in this video. I'm also giving you a link to 2 books that I find very helpful. One of them is The Artist's Handbook by Ralph Meyer, and the other one is The Painter's Handbook by Mark David Gottsagen. On my next video, we will talk about some other tips for oil painting. Till next time, keep growing your talent.